Thank you all for the opportunity to talk about the SDGs and to talk about SDG 11. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about the SDG 11 about sustainable cities and communities, and to give the perspective of Brazil. I work in Ipea, a think tank of the Brazilian federal government, and we were responsible for a report about the situation of all the SDGs, and I and a colleague, we worked on the SDG 11. So just to give a context on the SDGs, we had two targets related to cities on the Millennium Development Goals. And they were inside the seventh Millennium Development Goal, the goal about environmental sustainability. I think they were not that ambitious. The first one was related to sanitation. And here I give some figures on the report of the Millennium Development Goals of 2010. So we are not that bad in these indicators of the Millennium Development Goal. We did well. We have a worse situation in sewage, where we have inadequate sewage in 75% of the households, but we have good water collection. Water is not collection, it's water delivery. 91% of households have good water delivery, and we had a number of inadequate housing that went down from 1992 to 2012, from 53% to 36%. So this was the UN initiative before the SDGs. I would like to talk about also about the UN conference, Habitat Third. It is important because it came up with the new urban agenda that talked about the right to adequate housing. All the Habitat conference dealt with the right to adequate housing, but this one was more ambitious in the direction of sustaining that we need also the right to the city, and it was working towards sustainability, inclusion, and the participatory mechanisms of the policies, the urban policies. And Brazil has always had an important role in these international discussions, in all the Habitat conferences, because Brazil has a legislation which is acknowledged internationally, the city statute, because we have an article in our constitution which talks about social function of property. So it is seen as a humanitarian achievement, and it's in line with all this UN development of the housing right, or the right to adequate housing. So all the international agenda is in line with this Brazilian legislation, but we have problems in implementing that advanced legislation, the legislation on social function of property, but it is good that we have it. So when we arrive to the SDG discussion, we already had the new urban agenda discussion in mind. So what would be the role of the Sustainable Development Goals? We think our point of view is that it will translate the principles of the new urban agenda into concrete goals, and it also could direct the concrete actions of all the executive powers, the federal government, the state governments, and the municipal governments, so that the concrete actions of the government or even from the firms to be directed by these goals in case of the new urban agenda towards sustainable development of cities. And the SDG 11 brought much more emphatically the connection between the urban issues with the climate issues. I think it was a little bit in a hurry, like it was too quickly. It was coming in the discussion of the new urban agenda, but it came very, very strongly in the SDG discussion. So there is this emphasis on sustainable urban development, but I think that this approximation between urbanists, urban planners, people that work with the urban issues, with the climate people, it's very, it has been very quick, and we don't have a clear concept of sustainable urban development. I don't think that we have a consensus here, but I'm going to talk about it later. And Brazil has like this role in the international discussion, and Brazil was much more like developing the idea of social inclusion and social participation. And so the Brazilian view, like the view of the scholars who participated in these discussions, was that the right to the city and social participation was not so well translated into the goals of the SDG 11. Still, there is some issues, some preoccupation, some intention to include participation in the SDG 11, but it is also something that has to be more developed. And to bring some of the indicators that we helped to measure, we have one of the first ones, inadequate housing. So here we have all the federal units, the states of Brazil. The orange bar is Brazil. We have like over 40% of people living in urban areas are living in inadequate housing. So we have all the features of inadequate housing related to the definition of the UN and the definitions that were discussed in the Habitat conferences that deal not only with the infrastructure features like overcrowding, safety, but also with location and urban services, water and sewage. And we have one aspect, which is affordability of housing. To be adequate, it has to be affordable. And in our report, we try to separate both issues, like the issue of the house adequacy and urban services adequacy, water, sewage, overcrowding, and garbage collection. So the amount of people living in inadequate housing related to these aspects is a little bit over 30%. And we separated that from the issue of affordability. So we have a lot of people living in inadequate housing because of affordability, and affordability means that the family spends more than 30% of the family income on rent. We think that's inadequate because the family has to have money to spend on food, on clothes, on education, on commuting. And we have almost 30% of all Brazil living in inadequate housing according to that aspect. And another thing that we did was to try to understand what is due only for infrastructure and urban services and overcrowding, and how much of this inadequate housing is due to affordability. So the blue bars are the inadequate housing because of infrastructure and overcrowding, And the orange bars is inadequate housing exclusively because of affordability. So we can see that Brazil is very heterogeneous in its regions, and the problem of infrastructure and sanitation is very, very important in the North region. I'm sorry that the graphs are in Portuguese, but the North region is these first bars here. So we have like over 80% of people living in inadequate housing because of infrastructure issues. And you can see that in the Southeast, we have more problem with affordability, which makes sense because we all know that the Southeast is the more developed region. We have better infrastructure, better urban services, but we have this other problem with affordability. The other issue is informal housing and slums, but it is pretty much covered by these both issues. This is the official indicator based on the census of 2010. And Brazil has like 8% of population living in informal housing or slums, according to this indicator. So the bottom line for this first target of SDG 11 is that in Brazil, we have a problem with sanitation and affordability. And in sanitation, we have this regional pattern where the North and Northeast is much worse than the Southeast and the South. And for the North, for the Amazon region, we know that we need new technologies to be able to deal with the problem with sewage and water, because communities live by the rivers, and the regular technologies that we know, they don't work in these conditions. So some new technologies are being developed, but we need to foster the development of these new technologies. And in the Southeast, the problem of sanitation is mainly at slums, at informal housing. And so we need new approaches to be able to cope with that. And the other issue, big issue, is affordability, because affordability is a very big, important aspect of adequate housing. And it is a very big issue in developed countries too. So how can we promote lower housing prices in well-serviced areas with good opportunities? The indicator that measures that is excessive rent burden. And it has been one of the components of the housing deficit that has been growing in recent years, because we had this major social housing program, Minha Casa Minha Vida, that couldn't deal with this component of the housing deficit. This is a big issue, big problem. How could we solve this affordability problem? One way is to increase the income of families. The other way is to lower the house prices and house rents. And in my point of view, these social housing policies, such as Minha Casa Minha Vida, they subsidize demand, and they contribute for the increase of urbanized land prices, because they also subsidize the supply of houses, but we have a problem with the supply of urbanized land prices. And so these social housing programs have been contributing to the general growth of real estate price. So they are contributing to the problem of affordability instead of solving it. And if anyone wants to know more about it, please ask later. So going to the other target, the other main issue on making cities more inclusive and sustainable is about transport systems, so about urban mobility. We have one indicator that we could measure, which is people near transit, how much people live within 15 meters from a mass transit station. And we have this information only for 7 cities, and we can check that it is like at most 20 something percent of people living within 15 meters from mass transit. And the other indicator that we measured was how many people commute by active travel modes, such as by foot or by bicycle. And it is not low, this indicator. It's like around 25% of people for the whole of Brazil. And but this is not a consequence of policies that try to increase the use of bicycles, for instance. This is mainly due to people not having money to buy a car or gasoline, or not having money to pay for the fare of public transit. And so people travel by foot. And why is it important to study transport systems within cities to reach a more inclusive and sustainable city? Because housing is inseparable from its location, and the right to adequate housing is also a right to adequate housing location. So if housing is not adequate, if it is cut off from employment opportunities, healthcare facilities, schools, social facilities, dangerous areas. And so I asked myself, could the right to adequate housing be extended to the right to live wherever one wants to live? I don't think so, but this provocative question exhorts us to think that it's not any location of housing that is adequate. And so we should think about the interurban location of affordable housing. And this is a critique to the social housing, Minha Casa Minha Vida, which has built houses like anywhere in the outskirts of the cities, in the suburbs, where there was no city and where there was no connection to the cities. So we should think about promoting more infill development, and also making better transport systems, because the transport systems also promote accessibility to opportunities. And so cities can be these places where people can reach the opportunities and where social mobility can happen. And so cities can really be inclusive places. And what we learned from this is that we have to connect urban planning and urban transportation, which is a very difficult challenge. And I work with the federal government all the time. We know that they are separate secretaries, but they are trying to fix that. And we should think about it. Other targets that we can talk about that we could measure something about the participatory master plans. It's something very specific to Brazil. So there was a movement on the federal government to promote that the local municipality level master plans were made in a participatory way. And we see that in 2015, almost 50% of the municipalities had master plans that were supposed to be participatory. This is good. But what is happening now is that the participatory structure at the federal level has been dismantled. This is bad. We know that participatory policies are better policies, and we need participatory policies, and even more in urban planning, because people know the territory, people know where they live, people know better than anybody else what is necessary. And this knowledge should be included in the design of the urban policies. Another target I would talk about is target 11.6, that talks about garbage collection, not garbage, residual management. And air pollution, we don't have data on air pollution. We have data on solid waste collection only for big regions. We don't have for cities, which will be the indicator that we should have measured, but we only have access to the region. And but the big issue here is not only how much of the volume is collected and how much of the volume is disposed correctly, but that we have dump sites that had not been closed. We had a legislation that forbids the existence of dump sites, lixões, and they had not been closed. They should have been closed like, I don't know, 10 years ago. And so this is an example of how the local administration, the local municipalities have difficulties on implementing the legislations that are good, but are hard to implement. And to conclude, so to wrap up, we need to consolidate the concept of sustainable urbanization. And it's good to hear about how much the SDGs are influencing the organization of universities and transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, because we do need better concept of sustainable urbanization. We at Ipea, we are working now in a project about the impact of urban form on a more efficient use of fuel in urban commuting, and it is hard for us to understand, and there is not a concrete concept, and there was not a concrete concept of sustainable urbanization at the SDGs. I talked about like 2 SDGs, the inadequate housing, transport. Inadequate housing, we had good indicators, but transport systems, we don't have good indicators, and all the rest of the SDGs were very hard to measure. So we do have to promote the collection of new data that are necessary to be able to measure the indicators. If we can measure the indicators, they are not going to influence the implementation of new public policies. So we need data urgently. Today, we have better data than we had when we did this report, I don't know, 3 years ago. But we need more data, like in air quality. We had very ambitious indicators that are a problem to measure, not only in Brazil, but in the whole world, like empty spaces to be safe and to be accessible for everyone. Is like, who has the data to measure that? So we need more data. Another issue we have is the problem of the responsibilities of the federative entities. Is the Brazilian federative issue. It's a known problem. Like we had the constitution who tried to be less hierarchical and to decentralize the competences of the different federative entities and to give more autonomy to the municipalities, but the municipalities don't have the money to do all their responsibilities. So we have to solve this issue. We have to reinstate the participatory mechanisms in urban and environmental policy. I think everybody would agree on that one. And we have to guarantee that distinct urban policies are working in the same directions in this interdisciplinarity challenge. And even the transportation policies should be connected to the social housing policies, the urban planning policies. This is hard to do, but it is a challenge, and that we have to evolve on that. With that, I end my talk. Thank you again for opening this opportunity for me. I love talking about this topic, and I'm open to questions or remarks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vanessa Nadalin, to this very interesting presentation. You bring us very, very interesting data and several aspects concerning habitat, housing conditions, and interaction with politics, actions, and very, very interesting remarks at the end. So we are very, very honored to receive you here to talk to us, and I apologize for the technical problem we had at the beginning of your presentation. But we have time, and I will introduce you as your CV, very small CV, and at the same time, thank you again to your presentation, to accept our invitation to be here. Your presentation is very, very interesting. And I present to you, in general, Vanessa Nadalin works as a tenured researcher at the Institute of Applied Economic Research, Ipea, since 2009, focusing on the interface between academic research and design, monitoring, and evaluation of Brazilian federal government public policies. She has a PhD in economic theory at the University of São Paulo, and her fields of interest concern urban economics, urban policy, housing, and urban mobility. As we could clearly see and confirm in your presentation, that I think after your speech, all participants can have an approximate vision about Brazilian urbanization, Brazilian scenarios concerning houses, concerning condition of living in Brazilian cities. So Vanessa, thank you very much. In our program, the great speakers or the great conference as yours will follow by the other. We have two this morning in our program. So I thank you again, and I pass you again the possibility if you can complete some aspect in your presentation. Don't you have audio?
No, I couldn't unmute myself. I don't know where to start. So we have so many issues here. We have like the government issues. I think it's very important. My role as where I work in Ipea, because we try to make this bridge between the academic knowledge and the federal government needs to try to make a difference in the design of urban policies. And as I said, I think we need more effort of the academy to have more studies on sustainable urbanization. I deal with indicators all the time. I'm a data person, a quantitative person, and I work with those geocoded data and all, but we need more theory on what is urban sustainable development and why should we have it. And with the pandemic, for instance, we don't know what is going to happen. We know that during the pandemic, we had more people wanting to live near the nature and wanting to live in big houses. We know how much that is not in line with compact cities development. But at the same time, it is good for people to live near nature. So we have this issue of how to promote like urban development and to protect nature. And we know that if people go farther away, we're going to have bigger commuting. But at the same time, we don't know if people are going to work at home or not. We don't know what's going to happen if people are going to choose to work at home or to work at, or if people are going to choose, or if the firms are going to let them choose.
Yeah.
And so we are in a point now that we don't know how much that will affect our cities. My particular view is that in Brazil, we have an issue with how unequal our cities are. So we are unequal not only because of the income distribution, but in my point of view, we are unequal also because of the distribution of urban infrastructure. So we have our cities very divided, and we have the issues of slums and the city, and we have the urban divide. But as well, we have a problem of peripheries, which are not slums, but they are very underserviced. So we have very few neighborhoods in the city with adequate urban infrastructure, not only adequate housing, but adequate urban infrastructure. And because of that, accessibility to the opportunities is not good for many people. And many people go to the cities, but they live in neighborhoods that are not adequate in terms of the infrastructure, and they're not adequate because they don't give access to people. So I think we should, it is a challenge to think about the environmental issue and the social issue of how to deliver, because if we extend our the subways, if we extend the BRTs, if we extend the roads, we extending more the city, because the city won't be as compact as it could be. But at the same time, we should do that because people deserve to have accessibility to the opportunities. And this has been worsened by the pandemic, and we have so many issues to solve at the same time. The economical one, the political one, and I don't know, do we have questions?
Okay. No, I understand. It was very interesting here about these several aspects concerning the question. But of course, beyond the pandemic situation itself, the persons who could live near the nature in this time, of course, is relating a small part of population. It means there's something of social class, that possibility to live nearby the nature. The great part of Brazilian population can't do this. Everybody else knows that. But in this size, I would have another question to hear you or to know your point of view. For example, during around 10 or 14 years, we had a deep change in the Brazilian situation in, for example, living in cities. I mean, it's from around 2005 to 2015. We had a great passage from the very low class, or very bad conditions of life, to the better life, not good life, but better life. For example, around 40 million of Brazilians passed from D class to C class. And of course, with many political policies as support them. But could you talk, or could you could you divide with us your impression about the change from that period to nowadays? So the government changed, deep changed, and what happened? Could you help us? Yes.
we have economic cycles, and we were in a boom period. We were growing economically, and since 2015 we have a downward cycle of economic growth. We are going to grow again at some point. So what I think is that we had economic growth like 2005, 2015, and but we know that people went from class D to class C, buying more goods that are not like durable goods. Many people bought cars, and we had lots of problems of congestion. And we had federal policies that incentivized to buy a car. We shouldn't do that again. The cities don't support that. The cities were not supporting that. We had many congestion issues, but this better income of families, this growth of on the family income was not enough for the people to buy their own houses, for instance. We had at the same time a boom in housing prices, and we had in spite of having the enormous social housing program, we had a boom in housing prices, and we have this growth in the excessive burden of the rents. So we don't have more people buying their own homes, and we have more people spending more of their income in rents, in spite of the economic growth. So we do have an issue of housing prices. We have to deal with that. Otherwise, in the next housing boom, we're going to have the same problem. And about living near the nature, we are in a recessive period, and people don't have money to go to live near the nature. But maybe in the next economic growth, people could go. So imagine all the medium income families having access. It will be a very big impact. And so the legislation must be prepared for that, and cities must be prepared for that if everybody wants to live near the nature, like the medium income class in the next housing, because we know that the land is cheaper at the outskirts. And so if people can buy a car, and if people can live near the nature, everybody likes to live near the nature. So if income grows in a way that it is feasible, we must be prepared for that, because people are going to go.
So if I understand, you could say at the same time we had the better conditions to the income in families, we should have also political policies to the urbanization, because if we had the amelioration of lives in houses, we didn't have at the same time in the city. I think learn us to work to have policies, not a specific policy. And we have just one question, Vanessa, one last question, because we are at the end of our time. But some colleague from public following us question you, but one question too, but just objective question. How about the current policies of the current government? Do you consider we are moving forwards or backwards?
The current policies on urban policies. So currently we have the continuation of the social housing policy. Everybody criticized Minha Casa Minha Vida, but it's being continued, and it's being continued without the social part of it, without the housing built for the most poor families. So it's still a policy that subsidized demand. I don't think it's going to solve the problem, as I said before, because as subsidization of the demand, some of the subsidized, it's translated into the prices of land. I think that the provision of urban infrastructure should be subsidized or should be better organized. But then we have a problem with how to provide local public goods, because municipalities provide local public goods. And so we have to solve first the federative issue. We have to solve first how municipalities can fund their provision of local public goods. We have to solve the IPTU, the tax, the property tax, that is too low and is not able to fund what it should fund. There are so many things we should solve first. The policies are trying to be better. They are trying to include legislation to force those who build the new houses to build them with infrastructure, with parks, with roads reaching them. But still, it's not enough because they subsidize demand. This is the center of my critique.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vanessa, to be with us this morning, to bring us with this very interesting approach concerning life in the Brazilian cities. And it was, as I said, an honorable opportunity to have you with us. And apologize again for our technical problem. Thank you again. Wish you an excellent day. Thank you and bye.
Thank you. Congratulations for our event. It was a pleasure to meet you all, and I wish you success.